As we step into 2025, one thing is clear: de-dollarization is not stopping, it's accelerating. China and other BRICS nations are scared of President Trump, and it's making them more determined to reduce their dependence on the US dollar and establish themselves as a global economic superpower. Their secret weapon? Gold. In fact, China resumed buying gold. And you know what's even more telling? They underreport their buy. Doesn't it make you wonder why? They recognize its global value and its ability to withstand economic shocks. Gold is a global asset with innate value. It's tangible, reliable, and it's immune to economic manipulation. China and other BRICS countries want to be prepared. They just don't want it to be known. But this isn't about nations. It's about you. In a world of shifting economic power, gold is your personal hedge against uncertainty. That's why Noble Gold Investments can help you secure your financial future with gold. Visit noblegoldinvestments.com today to learn more. And with a qualified account, receive 10 1-ounce silver American Eagle coins. That's noblegoldinvestments.com. And remember, there's always a risk of investment and there's no guarantee of any kind. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the podcast. We have an exciting new guest with us, a good believer in the Lord and a fellow military man, Mr. Matthew Newgent, who's come directly from Major General Valley. And we are honored to have this fine gentleman with us vis-a-vis Major General Valley. And he's going to be giving us a lot of great insight as to some of the projects he's been working on, how they affect the military, and ultimately how they affect the community and the kingdom of God globally and here in the U.S. So we'll be getting his insights here in a moment. If you are new to the podcast, please do like, subscribe, and share so that others can gain the knowledge you've been afforded. As we always do with our first-time guests, we will read their bio verbatim, and it is as such. Matthew Nugent graduated from West Point in 1996, majored in Russian prior to West Point, and while in high school, he was a student ambassador to the Soviet Union. This was during the 1989 Cold War. After the fall of the Soviet Union, while he was a cadet, Matthew spent time in Russia for language immersion training. And before West Point, he was enlisted in military intelligence, whereby he was an interpreter. He's actually been trained in several languages to include French, Russian, Arabic, Czech, and Spanish, Japanese, as well as English. In the Army, he was an engineer officer and served at Fort Bragg military schools, including Airborne School, Ranger School, and as well as Sapper School. Total time.
I interrupted you, but it just comes out, John.
No, that's fine. That's authentic. Total time in service was 11 years. He is a founding member of the West Point Society of the West Point Graduates. He's a board member, vice president for donor relations, and the lead for congressional affairs. Matthew is an entrepreneur and business owner. He has been happily married to his wife for 25 years, and they have 3 teenage children. With all that said, Matthew, welcome to the podcast.
Great to be here, John. I appreciate your courage and manly Christianness, glorifying the Lord. And I'm a sinner saved by grace, and we need more men like you and I out there in this fight.
I agree. And we just do our part one by one, and we help galvanize others to said mission. So yeah, thank you for that. And thank you for being here. So Matthew, to start things off at the top, now that we've kind of read a cursory summary of your bio, can you tell us a little bit about one of the projects you're involved called the MacArthur Society?
You bet. So the MacArthur Society of West Point Graduates, MacArthur Society for short, it's a nonprofit, 501c3. We're not affiliated with any party per se. We are focused on a strong national defense, particularly with West Point and the other service academies. Our mission is to preserve, defend, and advocate for West Point's history, purpose, and principles of duty, honor, country. We are a voice for West Point because just like the U.S. Constitution can't defend itself, West Point can defend itself. We are often a voice for cadets who want to reach out, and they have, including somewhat behind the scenes military personnel who can't speak out because the fact is we've got a military chain of command, minus a few days, that is working against the Constitution. And so there's a conflict there. Part of what we want to do and what I want to do is to inculcate an idea of critical thinking. But as we build that, we at MacArthur Society are here to do our part to, as the members of the Long Gray Line, to save West Point.
Okay. And how do we as a country collectively and as from a civilian standpoint, how do you, in your estimation, how do we take up arms to fight against the warfare other than spiritually?
That's a great question. But it is spiritual warfare. It all is spiritual. It just has different manifestations. But I'll speak in the corporeal. And to get in the fight and have any chance at all, you have to understand the battlefield. In fact, we wrote 5-paragraph op-ords, means operations order, and it always starts with the situation. And to understand the situation, now I don't know your mix of military to civilian, but nowadays every single civilian is in the war. But I'll speak in military terms. So 3 points. I'll give you the first two. Number one, you have to see this through a military lens. So we're going to talk primarily about West Point and the services here, so it makes sense. But it also applies to our country. But for West Point, we're going to focus on seeing it through a military lens. Our enemies hate us. They don't like our freedom of speech. They don't like us to have free enterprise. They don't like our prosperity. They don't like our right to property. They don't like our Judeo-Christian heritage. I can tell you that for certain. So they attack us in different ways, which brings me to the second point. It's called the spectrum of war. Typically, we as Americans, and even the military, we think of warfare primarily and only really in kinetic terms, meaning bullets, bombs, artillery, aircraft carriers, what have you. The fact is, it's a spectrum. We have kinetic warfare. We all grew up watching, you're younger than I, but you watched some different World War II movies or Vietnam Wars. The other part was non-kinetic warfare. Now, the concept of cultural Marxism is warfare. The godfather, I shouldn't say that, I shouldn't say God in this sentence, but the father of the cultural Marxism concept is Antonio Gramsci, okay? He made the correct, he asserted the correct understanding that making the United States or the Western cultures communistic was not going to work because how it did in Russia, because Russia had serious financial hardship. It was hand to mouth for survival. But the Western culture has typically religious freedom and financial prosperity. So you can't go in there and say, the man's trying to get you, when you've got, 2 cars, multiple TVs, a cell phone. Even back then, it was very strong. I don't know what the equivalent of a cell phone was back then, 20, 30, 40, 5 generations ago. But we in the West, including the United States, are very prosperous. So Antonio Gramsci postulated, and he was correct, you have to attack the culture, and you do it through cultural Marxism. He called this the march through the institutions. It was a march, as in a warfare march. Now that said, it's very powerful. Okay, there's kinetic warfare and non-kinetic warfare, but we as Americans, we as the Department of Defense, don't think in those terms. And in fact, I'll give you an example of non-kinetic warfare. Okay, as you kindly read in my bio, I was enlisted before I went to West Point. And my job was in military intelligence. Okay, there were 2 parts to it. One was I was an interpreter. I studied Czech. Very fascinating. Went to Defense Language Institute, 8 hours, actually it's like 12 hours a day because you're studying like crazy, And the other part was electronic warfare. Now, I never made it to the electronic warfare part because I went on to West Point Prep School in West Point. But still, when we were there, John, there was a story that we all shared about this E4 specialist. Are you ever related to the military? Are you familiar with the ranks?
Yeah, I mean, I have some military family, so I have some familiar, but I'd always like hearing it from the horse's mouth. So please.
Okay. Well, an E4 in the Army is called a specialist. E5 would be a sergeant or buck sergeant, depending on what terminology you want to use. Well, there was this E4 specialist who was basically the same job as I had and my colleagues had at that time, and it was a big exercise in Germany. I think it's Hohenfeld's. And his job in military intelligence was basically twofold: to get in there, break into the frequency, and infiltrate them and subvert it. When you subvert something, and that's a phrase that not a lot of us are familiar with, when you subvert something, you take it over and you fool your adversary to believe that they are acting on their own behalf or for their own ends, but they're actually being directed toward their demise. Okay, now, and the story went like this. This specialist, E4, is listening, and this specialist broke in at the lowest level he could, which was a squad. and he had been listening to the frequency, kind of figured out how they spoke, and he ordered a squad to chow. In the military, that means to go get your MRE or go get your hot A's, okay? To go get some food, okay? So, and he gave them, I want you to listen very carefully, he gave them the correct information, okay? He had to get in there and own those comms first. Now, when they gave him the challenge and password, he had been studying and listening, so he knew it. So he go in there and they said, okay, hey, Sergeant, we're moving to chow. They go to chow, okay, they get there, fine. Over the course of the exercise, he worked up to the platoon, found out where they were, and he consolidated a lot of the infantry battalion in a relatively small area. Think about that. So he went to his platoon leader and said, sir, I think I know exactly where the battalion is, and I kind of put him in a small spot. And he looked at his work and he said, you sure did, calling in an artillery strike. This E4 specialist basically got credit for destroying an entire infantry battalion, almost single-handedly. Now, granted, he had great training, he had great comms, he obviously knew the language, he had good leadership in his platoon leader, and obviously artillery. But here are a couple big takeaways. It's two. Okay, usually there are three halves to all my stories, so it's two now, it might be a third, okay? And the first one is non-kinetic warfare is very powerful. What this, MI specialist was doing was a form of non-kinetic warfare, okay? Second, non-kinetic warfare is the pretext for kinetic warfare. What we're seeing, what we saw in Louisiana with this murder from this guy who's from ISIS. Unfortunately, I think he was in the military too. That is part of jihad. The experts, the intelligence experts, and we can talk about this more in another episode perhaps, but they told us and me this would happen, and they said exactly how it would, interestingly enough, and it escalates. So non-kinetic warfare is very dangerous. And number two, non-kinetic warfare is typically a pretext to kinetic warfare. Now, that said, that brings us to cultural Marxism, DEI, critical race theory. Okay, and you probably already know this is a good review for a lot of your audience. Karl Marx is a German. Okay, at first, back in the early 1900s, before Hitler gained a lot of power, there was the Marxist school. We have different colleges in the United States, we have different colleges, and they're often named by in fact, the Colorado School of Mines, it's like they specialize in developing miners and engineers. Well, in Germany, they had the Marxist school. Well, they didn't like that because Karl Marx is bad dude, okay? So they changed it to the Frankfurt School. When Hitler gained power, that's two tyrannical ideologies fighting each other, they fled to the United States. It was about 15 or 16 of them. They were professors, and I'm guessing you know what university they went to. It was Columbia.
Columbia.
Now, the Ivy League, that's Roman numeral, Ivy, that's four. Harvard, Yale, Princeton, Columbia, one of the original Ivy League schools. And since then, okay, they propagated Marxism. Now, Marxism has many different manifestations. At first, there was a critical theory, which is kind of Marxism together. Then there's critical legal theory, and then it evolved into critical cultural Marxism or critical race theory. Okay, so, and you've got DEI. So what you've got here is a long train of non-kinetic warfare. And so the third point of all this is wokeism is warfare. Wokeism is warfare. Now, right now, we've got a new Secretary of Defense nominee, Pete Hegseth. But any questions so far about that, John?
No, it makes sense. I'm curious how you're going to tell us about how you've worked to infiltrate that and counteract it.
Okay, great. So I don't know Pete Hegseth. I read a couple of his books. his recent one, War Against the Warrior, another one, Battle for the American Mind, which is very powerful. You'll love it. You'll be inspired by it. It'll bring you to your knees a little bit when you realize how much we as an American culture have lost. I'll talk to that if we have time in a second. But with Pete Hegseth, God willing, he will become the Secretary of Defense. And I will say that we as a MacArthur Society can't, might be considered a political party, but I'll speak to his policy and I'll couch it with, this is my opinion. Based on his understanding of warfare against the United States, he understands non-kinetic warfare, and he understands the damage that non-kinetic warfare has, at the hands of our enemies, damage is done against our culture. It's very sad that he gives me a lot of hope. Also because he's courageous, he's a critical thinker, he's very bright. He went to, I think, Yale and Princeton. So, I mean, you're not too shabby, If we're Harvard, I'd say, hold on here, Their motto, Veritas, is kind of like the modern Pravda, if you're familiar with, Pravda and all. And it is the name of the Soviet newspaper, and everybody knew that Pravda is supposed to mean truth, but it wasn't really. So when you hear the word Pravda, they're mocking it. So, it's very inspiring. So, in terms of what's going on at our service academies, would you like a little update on that?
Please.
Okay, so I'll segue into what you asked. What is the MacArthur Society doing? Okay, a lot of people don't know, but the MacArthur Society actually broke the story about the West Point superintendent removing duty, honor, country from the West Point mission statement. Yeah. I mean, did you guys ever talk about that or hear about that? How? Okay.
Not to the degree that you're going to do it, so that's why I was curious.
Okay. So let me ask you this, and you probably are more deep into the news. Definitely, I've watched some of your works. You cover a lot of content, so you are much more of a subject matter in many areas than I am, for sure. But when you hear the words or duty, honor, country, John, what comes to mind?
Well, I mean, military obviously embodied that for the longest period of time, right? Service, bond servant comes to mind. Sacrifice. I mean, there's many things, but that immediately, that's what's coming to mind.
Okay. Okay, great. And you're right, all of that. And that is the motto, that has been the motto of West Point for I don't know how many decades: duty, honor, country. It was made famous. Actually, it was made famous in our content, in our conduct as the U.S. military. And when I say soldiers, I mean Army, Navy, soldiers, sailors, Marines, airmen, and the Guardians. Yeah, the Space Force. They picked a good name, but so, and that's what it meant. So if you understand how non-kinetic warfare works and our enemies work against the United States, and I've studied them, okay, their goal is to deconstruct a society. Now, it's very slowly, but it happens. In fact, the concept of spectrum of war, this is kind of how it evolved. Kinetic warfare, non-kinetic warfare, is we were talking amongst ourselves at MacArthur Society, and I was saying, guys, there is something going on. I don't have the words for it, but this wokeism is destroying us. And the president of the MacArthur Society, Colonel retired Bill Prince, warrior, badass. Am I allowed to say that on the show? He's totally badass.
Sure.
He'll say, no, I've just been in battles in many, many different continents. I was like, Bill, that's bad. He's like, he's humble man too. And he reached out to a general and he said, hey, help us understand this. And the general says, it's a spectrum of war. You thought, say that again? Yeah, it's a spectrum of war. In fact, every month we have what's called a commander's call, and you got to sign up, but your audience can attend. It's very powerful. It's 60 minutes. We have a speaker. You get a little update on the front line. It's very powerful. And he said, yeah, it's a spectrum of war. It's kinetic warfare, non-kinetic warfare. And then it hit us, John. Wokeism is warfare. And then we look back and study this. This warfare has been waging against the United States for generations. And Pete Hegseth in his book, The Battle for the American Mind, I've got it up right here. He talks about In that context right there, he's speaking against our schools. He talks about how the schools, and that was back right after the Civil War. In his book, he said the Pledge of Allegiance was actually a way to get people to pledge to the country rather than to God.
Mm.
Now think about that. It's a slight switch. And remember that E4 specialist? He first gives them something solid so they can cling to. He said, "Oh yeah, you'll go to Chow. Oh yeah, you'll, you know, salute your country," but it takes them away. And in fact, I think it was Eisenhower that put the words "under God" because the word had gotten out that the person who made the Pledge of Allegiance was communist.
Mm.
And so Eisenhower said, "No, we're going to do one nation under God." So he, in some ways, he corrected it. So our enemy is very smart. They're very patient. They're unscrupulous, and they're ruthless. So now, in terms of what's going on at West Point, here's kind of and the service academies. Okay, now to understand this through a military lens. Okay, this all really kicked off, and MacArthur Society became rather popular, I guess you could say, more known and more influential when we broke the story about the removal of duty on our country. Because believe it or not, we got a lot of people from other branches of service, Air Force, Marines, Navy, our arch rival, and they were very concerned. We were too, but that alone, changing the mission statement itself is not necessarily a big deal, but it made us look back, and we kind of already knew something was wrong in a big way. But we studied all these different points. And when you've got multiple attacks manifesting in non-kinetic warfare context, you realize this is an outright assault against our society, which is exactly what Antonio Gramsci said he would do. And so he was right. Now, as far as here's some specific problems, obviously they removed the duty on our country from the mission statement. West Point has a minor in diversity and inclusion. One of the main capstone, don't worry, it gets worse. one of the capstone projects, and as you probably know, a capstone project, if you're like an engineer major, it's a project for the whole semester, the whole year, and it's approved by your section head or your professor. Well, one of the projects was, get ready for this. This was a main capstone project. There was a talk, and we have it all documented. The history of cross-dressing in the military. Oh, it goes on. Leave it at that, okay? Let's go to the Navy. They have their own diversity and inclusion minor as well. And within those classes, 2 separate midshipmen reached out to our contacts behind the scenes, John. And they complained to us and said, we are required at the beginning of every class when we report, because when everyone's in class, they say, "Sir, ma'am," they salute, and I'm saluting now for those of you who can't see. 19 present accounted for. Well, they were required, John, when they saluted and reported, to give their preferred pronoun. Think about that. Now, eventually, much credit to those dirty, rotten Navy squids. Okay, it's a rivalry, man. For those of you Navy guys out there and gals, you'll understand. Much to their credit, they said, "We're not going to do it." And I was like, man, I'm proud of those squids. I'm telling you, it beat us this year, John. It hurts. I know for those of you out there, like, we beat you. Stop. But much credit and their critical thinking. And it takes guts to say, "Sir, ma'am, I'm really not comfortable doing that. We need more of that." Shifting over to the Air Force Academy, and the Air Force Academy, John, has gotten the brunt of the attack. And here are a few examples, and there are more, but here are the most prominent. Okay, first of all the service academies are the crown jewels of the military. Okay, but the shiny jewel of it all in each service academy is its honor code, and West Point and the Air Force Academy have basically the identical code. Navy, it's a little bit different, but it's the same concept. But it's basically this: cadet will not lie, cheat, steal, or tolerate those who do. See, there's don't lie, cheat, or steal, and there's toleration. Without the toleration clause, you won't have a culture of honor. because you hold people accountable. You hold your buddies accountable. It's not easy. It's not easy, John. I'm telling you. You know how it is. Leading your peers is very difficult, okay? So what the superintendent at the Air Force Academy did is suspended the toleration clause of the honor code at the Air Force Academy for the first 2 years. What that did was it just is destroying the culture of honor. Now, the excuse was we're not getting, America's not like that. I'm not going to cuss on your show, but that's a bunch of malarkey. Leaders lead. The best and brightest go to our service academies because they expect, and their parents and their families and their loved ones expect for the service academies to say, this is the standard. You make it or you're out. Mm-hmm. Our soldiers demand it. One of the things I learned at West Point, there are many, but this one stood out. It says, your soldiers demand good leadership. And you're thinking, what is my soldier going to do? Sir, you need to do this. It's not really. They say, sir, I need your help. Sir, they depend on you, and the need of training, and it's dangerous. I've been on operations and training where soldiers have died. It's real, and they demand good leadership. Well, America's sons and daughters, the best and the brightest of our country, demand that our service academies hold those standards. And the current superintendent is failing its airmen, and it's failing their parents, and it's failing America. Second, they have...
As we enter 2025, de-dollarization is accelerating. China and BRICS nations are reducing their dependence on the US dollar, and their secret weapon, gold. China's buying gold, quietly underreporting their purchases. Why? Because they know gold's global value, its ability to withstand economic shocks, and its immunity to manipulation. This isn't just about nations, it's about you. Gold is your personal hedge against uncertainty. Noble Gold Investments can help you secure your financial future with gold. Visit noblegoldinvestments.com now, and with a qualified account, receive 10 1-ounce silver American Eagle coins. Remember, there's a risk of investment, and there's no guarantee of any kind.
Let's see here. How can I say this? So, the crown jewel is the honor code. So they are tearing that apart. At the same time, they have a diversity officer. In the Army, it's called a company. In the Air Force, it's called a squadron, about 120 people, four platoons, okay? And they wear a purple rope on their uniform. They're the diversity officer. So basically, it's a soft intimidation saying, you will follow this CRT, DEI concepts, or there will be problems. And I have heard interviews, and I have read, they're called cadets, Air Force Academy cadets, complaining. It said, if I don't toe the line, the diversity officer is going to give me a hard time. So think about it. The Air Force Academy is destroying the honor code, and it's elevating cultural Marxism. Oh, and by the way, if you've ever heard in some of this diversity and equity or diversity and inclusion training, it has many names. Mm-hmm. One of the directives was don't use gender specific words, like don't use mother and father. Oh yeah, is that the same? So those are three examples from the Air Force Academy, and which we think, the data show that the Air Force Academy is getting worse. But those three things, it is warfare. So those are kind of the big points. What questions do you have so far?
Sure. Thank you, Matthew, for that very important dissection and breakdown of the questions within the subtext of it. With the time we have left for today, because like you said, we're going to need a reprise, obviously. You can't get this all in one podcast. Two questions really to end for today, which would be, you mentioned Pete Hegseth. And so, we're entering arguably one of the most important inaugurations, and certainly in modern history, next week with President Trump. Mm-hmm. How much latitude and leeway it's a two-part question. How much latitude and leeway do you think President Trump and Kash Patel at this point, abutting him, will allow him to do his job or open up pathways for him to do what needs to be done to correct these atrocities? And secondly, from your overrub of people associated with the president, how effective do you anticipate him being in this administration? What do you see lying ahead as it relates to the discussion points?
Okay, so there are two parts to that, two parts of the answer to that question. The first is, Trump said, not in these words, but the biggest mistake he made in what is now his first term as president was he didn't have the right people in place and he didn't have enough. Okay. So Trump, I mean, for literally for 2, 3 years, he's been finding people, interviewing, now up until he won the election the third time, you know, he didn't, really focus on it. But once he did, he had a big kind of Rolodex of leaders to come by. So the first part is finding the right people. In my opinion, Matthew Nugent, Pete Hegseth is 100% the right people. Okay. And which leads to the second part of that answer is how does Trump utilize, leverage, and use his leaders? Okay. And from what I've read and what I've heard is Trump gives them the maximum leeway possible. Okay. And when you've got the best leaders, you can do that. It's more than just delegates, he empowers. Okay. So when you have someone who's in alignment with how you think, which Pete Hegseth is, Kash Patel is. Have you ever heard Kash Patel? He is no joke. He is strong, he is competent, and he's courageous. He's very bright, and he understands the law. And he understands how dangerous that it is in our country. And in my opinion, we could have gone to a civil war, but that's another conversation for a reprise. But thank God, I don't think it'll go that way. So the answer is, Trump selected the best people, and we give a couple of names there. You did, and I agree with you on those. Second, he gives them both the authority and the empowerment to go make it happen. And Pete Hegseth, based on how he thinks, and books like this, Battle for the American Mind and War Against the Warrior, don't happen by accident. They don't happen by accident. I'm sure Trump's been thinking about it a while. He was actually nominated to be the director of the VA in Trump's previous term, and and there were other folks that got it in front of him. But he's been on Trump's short card, or in his
Short list.
for a long time. And in fact, some folks actually nominated me to be a part of Trump's administration. And if I'm, yeah, oh yeah, absolutely. Something I didn't mention. Do we have enough time? A couple minutes?
Sure, go ahead.
Okay. It's called the Duty Honor Country Commission. All right, I'll be as fast as I can. Just let me know if I need to. It's totally cool. Well, back in 1976, I hate to say it, but West Point had a cheating scandal. 153 cadets were either ejected or found guilty for cheating on an electrical engineering exam. It's pretty bad. It so shocked the American psyche that the Secretary of the Army stood up a commission, and that to find out what the problem was. And it was headed by Frank Borman, who was a West Point grad Air Force pilot and a NASA astronaut, Mr. All-America, right? Well, it was called the Borman Commission, and he did this study. It's called the Blue Ribbon Study. They bring in subject matter experts, led by what questions like what caused this, what are the sources, et cetera. And, from that, West Point made some changes. For example, cadets used to be there for 4 straight years, but they broke them up in 2 years because cadets were more loyal to each other than to the honor code, which is bad. Is it any surprise now that presidents recently shifted it from changing every 2 years to staying all 4 years? Okay, all right. You smell what I'm cooking, okay? So we are proposing MacArthur Society. Basically, it's a joint operation between STARS, MacArthur Society, and Calvert Task Group, representing Air Force, West Point, and Naval Academy, respectively, called the Duty Honor Country Commission. It's very similar to the Borman Commission, but it's focused on not just honor and not just one service academy, but it's honor, it's race-based admissions, it's cadet conduct, and a whole bunch of other things at all 3 military academies. United States Military Academy, United States Naval Academy, United States Air Force Academy. So it's a big deal. And we put together a presidential executive order draft, 55 pages of content and how to direct this. And the guy, it wasn't me that thought of this. There's some really brilliant people at MacArthur Society, man. So anyway, that's kind of it. I know we're short for time. That's one of our biggest objectives. Does that answer your question?
It does. Yeah. Thank you for that. I appreciate that. As we close for today, I understand you were telling me offline about a book that you're coming up with. So I'll kind of wrap that into the question, which is, if people want to find out more about you, which we would always encourage with our guests to do, where can they find your work, and talk a little bit about maybe the book as an entry point to learning more about your background?
Yeah, thanks. Well, you're actually the first person I've ever talked to outside of the MacArthur Society about this. Um,
Thank you.
it's God kind of put this on my heart in a big way, and it's already there. I just had to capture it. My intent is to be done with the draft by the end of this month. Actually, it's supposed to be done by December, but but I think it'll be done by the end of January and out in February after I get it edited and self-published. But it'll basically talk about courage and critical thinking and how it aimed at American soldiers, how they will save our country. And a big phrase I have is citizenship before soldiership. Okay, because when I was a soldier, and many said this, I'm in the military, I'm not political. That is, how can I say it, the most unwise thing I've ever said in the military. Service members are very powerful with all their weaponry, their training, and they should understand the Constitution. They should be engaged. Okay, did you know that when the US Constitution came out, George Washington put a standstill on everybody, and they said, read the Declaration of Independence to the soldiers and explain it. Okay, but we haven't done that. We make an oath. So anyway, the book's gonna kind of be about that. Thank you for asking. If you'll allow me, I'll come back, talk about it, and it'll have a whole lot of fun. But it's mostly aimed at soldiers, but any American citizen or someone who loves our military will appreciate this.
Great. And again, just for reference point, how can they find your work? Is there a
Okay,
website or
so
anything?
I haven't put that site up yet, thank you. But in terms of supporting the MacArthur Society, MacArthurSociety.org, that's MAC, MacArthurSociety.org. Three things I got for you. One is get on our email list. It's phenomenal. We have great content, often original sources. Some we write, some we forward. It's great stuff. The second is, I mentioned it, we have a commander's call. It's once a month. It's typically an hour, boom. We have great, we have a subject matter expert come in. It's very empowering. And the third is, if you can, please donate, whether it's $5 or if you're blessed to be a high net worth person, you can reach out to me at mission@MacArthurSociety.org, mission@MacArthurSociety.org.
Excellent. One last question, if you don't mind me cheating a little bit on our time, just because it's come up to me from several military family members and friends to ask the question. And we actually posed it to General Vallée, and it was just, it wasn't one of his core concentration points at that time. So you may or may not know, but it never hurts to ask. There's been a lot going on, as you know, inside the military with regards to DUMS units being
In terms of what units you said?
DUMS units, deep underground military bases, with trafficking and such, and kind of, what people I think are told in the mainstream, that are earthquakes are actually dissembling and dismantling of said DUMS units. So I was just wondering if you were aware of that or had any thoughts about that.
Obviously, no. DUMBs are the deep underground military bases.
Sure.
I know that some countries have deep underground military bases. Israel has aircraft inside of a mountain. They could take off right out of a mountain. I am not that deep in that aspect of our military. I've been out for several years, so sorry, I can't give you a good answer on that, but I'm going to check it out.
That's fine. I just figured, again, you're on the military side of things. It's a 50-50 shot, but
excuse me.
So
Well,
anyway,
when you report on it, send it to me because I want to hear about it, John.
no problem. We covered that a lot in our Telegram. Actually, matter of fact, we talked about it a lot this past week with respect to the California fires, and there's a lot of what they call CMEX tunnels that have been running all the way from Hollywood down to the Long Beach ports that have a lot of trafficking
Oh,
and
really?
pedophilia and money laundering that have been
Well,
taking
that
place
I believe, yeah.
quite some time. And it's just, it's going to take the truther community is, I think, pretty aware of it, but to get to the main cycle of time of news.
Well, you touched on something that we definitely have to come back to is they know about it. A lot of the stuff is going on because someone wants it to happen.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely accurate. 100%. As we close up, folks, today, we appreciate your time. We have a new sponsor to the channel that we're excited about, Noble Gold. You've seen them premiered on X22, which is a channel we highly respect, and many do as well. And they're one of the forefront leaders in precious metals. As Matthew knows, Haggai 2:8 says, gold and silver is mine, says the Lord. And we certainly recommend that not financial advisors, but certainly purveyors of the financial wealth transfer, as you all know. Many of you are here for that. And we're blessed to have people like Matthew contribute to the totality of that message. But it's a company that we're honored to sponsor, and they're one of the leaders in forefronts in precious metals. So we certainly recommend you check them out at noblegoldinvestments.com and get a free prospectus. And it doesn't hurt to ask questions and either get precious metals or add to the cachet of what you've got. And we'll leave that link in the description. Matthew Nugent, we appreciate your time, good sir. We thank you for your service.
Cool.
And hoorah. And we look forward to having you again on in February if time permits in your schedule.
Okay, honored to be here, John. Thanks so much. God bless you.
Honored as well. God bless you.